Hey everyone, and welcome to today's Explainer. So usually, we tackle massive data sets on here, or we're digging through really lengthy historical documents or complex scientific research. But today, we are actually doing something completely different, and I'm super excited about it. We're going to unpack an entire era, a whole decade, through just 8 concentrated words. Seriously, just 8 words. And the crazy thing is, these words somehow managed to capture the absolute weight, the sheer tension, and the gritty reality of literally one of the most defining periods in human history. They are basically the perfect lens for us to explore a time that completely reshaped the modern world. Let's dive right into it.
But before we even look at our text for today, I want to pose a question to you guys. What actually defines a decade? I mean, really think about how we usually label periods of time. We almost always use these fun, upbeat cultural touchstones, right? We talk about the flappers and the wild jazz of the Roaring '20s, or we think about the psychedelic music and those incredible moon landings of the swinging '60s. We love to define decades by catchy trends or these massive, exciting technological leaps. But as we all know, history isn't always packaged into neat, cheerful little boxes. Sometimes a decade isn't defined by a fun mood or a pop culture trend, it's completely swallowed by a singular, overwhelming weight. So what happens when an entire 10-year span is totally dominated by one inescapable, heavy reality?
Well, here is our source text for today. The Great Depression, Life in 1930s America. Just read that to yourself for a quick second. Notice the pacing that's built right into the punctuation itself. It's brilliant. We have this massive, incredibly heavy first half, the Great Depression. You naturally find yourself saying it slower, with the sheer gravity that it demands. Then there's a colon. A pause, just taking a breath. And then the second half pivots entirely. Life in 1930s America. That pivot instantly tells us that we aren't just going to be looking at dry economic charts and dusty bank ledgers today. We're looking at a collision, a violent collision between a massive historic event and the everyday, ordinary people who just had to wake up and figure out how to survive it.
Okay, Section 1, the Great Depression. We're going to start by looking entirely at the overarching macro event.
By isolating just these specific words, the Great Depression, we can really start to feel their massive impact. Think about the specific choice of words here. It's kind of funny. Usually when we say something is great today, we mean it's fantastic, it's awesome. But here, great means immense. It means unparalleled. It means a scale of economic collapse so unbelievably massive that absolutely nowhere on Earth was insulated from it. To put that greatness into perspective for you, at its absolute peak, global GDP fell by an estimated 15%. In international trade, it plunged by a staggering 50%, half of it, just gone. That is a cataclysmic drop. It's a number that establishes an inescapable shadow over everything. This wasn't just some localized recession or a bad quarter for the markets. This was the defining atmosphere of the entire globe.
And that brings us to the word depression. Now, in standard, textbook economic terms, it's defined as a severe, sustained, long-term downturn in economic activity. But in the context of this specific era, oh man, it's far, far more than just a dry financial term. It is a heavy promise of deep, sweeping hardship. Look, it wasn't just ticker tape crashing down on Wall Street or some abstract numbers dipping in a ledger somewhere. It was thousands, literally thousands of banks completely failing, locking their doors, and taking entire life savings down with them in an instant. It was booming factories going completely eerily silent. It was crops literally rotting away in the field. It's because no one, anywhere, could afford to buy them. It was endless breadlines stretching completely around city blocks. This was a severe decline that seeped right into the soil, into the homes, and totally altered the futures of everyday people.
Moving on to Section 2, 1930s America. Now we are shifting focus directly to the human element.
Life in 1930s America. This second half of our text introduces such a stark, incredible contrast to the first. The word life is doing so much heavy lifting here. When you have a sweeping, completely impersonal disaster, like a global depression, or the suffocating, pitch-black dirt storms of the Dust Bowl, it is incredibly easy for us to just get lost in the macro statistics. But that word, life, it reminds us of the daily grind. It's about mothers meticulously, painstakingly sewing clothes out of rough, scratchy flour sacks simply because actual fabric was way too expensive to even consider. It's about entire families crowding closely around a crackling wooden radio in the evening to listen to FDR's fireside chats, desperate for just a sliver of hope or reassurance. It's about desperate folks migrating west, packing everything they own into old, beat-up jalopies, looking for literally any scrap of work they could find.
It grounds this massive, unthinkable scale of the Depression into real, gritty human resilience.
And this brings us right to the absolute core of our text today, the clash. On one side, you've got the Great Depression. This represents the failing systems, the totally shattered markets, and these massive, invisible forces completely beyond any single person's control. On the other side, life in 1930s America represents the people. But here's the thing. It's not just a comparison between the two. It is an intersection. You simply cannot understand one without understanding the other. The macro event absolutely forced millions of people into impossible, desperate situations. But it was the micro, the everyday human adaptability, the neighbors unconditionally helping neighbors, the sheer, stubborn will to just keep going that ultimately carried the country through the entire decade. So yes, the historical event absolutely shaped the people, but make no mistake, the people defined the era.
So that brings us to the ultimate question we have to ask ourselves. How did daily life intersect with such a massive historical era? What actually happens when ordinary life, with all of its mundane routines and quiet, simple hopes, violently collides with earth-shaking history? You see, these 8 words we looked at today, they aren't just a title, they are an invitation. It's an invitation for all of us to look past the grainy black and white photos and the dry historical labels we learn in school and to try to see the real people standing in the shadow of total collapse. So the next time you see a sweeping historical headline, stop and ask yourself, what was the actual reality of the people living underneath it? Thank you guys so much for joining me on this explainer today, and as always, keep asking those big questions.